And you are live.
Great. Welcome to a joint committee meeting this afternoon on the date, which is out of my head, but we'll call it January 10th for as our best guess. As a joint hearing between the House Education Committee and the Senate Education Committee. And we're here to hear a report from the Agency of Education and Secretary Saunders on her Listen and Learn tour around Vermont, and really some of the themes and information that is derived from that. Before we begin, because this really is the first time that our two committees have come together, and in fact, the first time that the Senate Education Committee has come together, let's do a very quick round of introductions around the table. Name and town you're from, and we'll move on from there, beginning with Representative Tooth.
Representative Casey Tooth, I represent St. Albans City and St. Albans Town.
Representative Leanne Harple, I represent Albany, Crafts, Great Glover, and Greensboro.
Senator Heffernan, I represent Addison County.
Rob Hunter, Manchester, Arlington, Sandgate, and Sunderland.
Representative Shannon Brown, I represent the town of Richmond.
Senator David Weeks, representing Rutland County.
Senator Seth Baumgartz, Bennington Senate District.
Representative Peter Conlon, Chair of the House Education Committee, and I'm from Cornwall.
Senator Nader Hashim, representing Wyndham County.
Representative Joshua Dobrovich, representing Williams-Sonoma.
Representative Chris Taylor, Milton, Georgia.
Senator Keisha Ram Hinsdale, Chittenden Southeast.
Representative Emily Long, Newfane, and other things.
Representative Beth Quimby, Sheffield, Wheelock, Sutton, Newark, and Linden.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all right.
I represent Nicole McCann, and I represent Honda.
Thank you. Just for a little logistics here, Senator Baumgartz might even get a chance to sort of confer early, but I think what we'll do is we'll kind of run through the whole presentation. We'll move on to questions. Maybe we'll have the Senate go first, exhaust their questions, move on to the House if there are any questions, or we may end up ping-ponging back and forth, but maybe we'll.
That's a dangerous thing to give the Senate.
For questions. I'll say questions. Great. So I think at this point, we'll turn it over to the two of you. If you'd introduce yourselves for the record, and looking forward to your presentation.
Good afternoon. I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education, and I want to thank you for coming together. I know that this is your first day being in these roles, and really appreciate the opportunity for you to coordinate so that we can share this information in one meeting and get your thoughts. I'd like to ask Jill to share also a little bit about her role and her reflection on the Listen and Learn tour, and then we'll walk through our presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jill Briggs Campbell. I'm the interim deputy secretary for the Agency of Education. For those who know me, you may know me as the director of operations or COVID federal emergency funds manager. So it's really great to be back in the State House in this new role and doing this really exciting work with all of you. It's big work, and we're thrilled to be doing it. Yeah, and I guess before we sort of kick off to the presentation, I will share just sort of my experience of the Listen and Learn, and Zoe's going to talk about all of the places that we went. I joke that I have now seen more Vermont towns than my native Vermont husband, which is a real point of pride for me in my house. But I'm a former educator. I'm a fifth generation educator. And so I love it when I get to be in school. It feels like home for me. And this experience of getting to go around the state, and we did the Listen and Learn, but we've also really starting this summer, we've been out in the state a lot for, Capital for a Day. And I spent a lot of time up in Newport this year. And really getting to see parts of the state that I hadn't before. And I've been here for 7 years, and really got the opportunity to get to every corner of it, and to be in schools, talking to teachers, talking to principals, talking to students, talking to families. It was a really wonderful experience. And for me, and I think also for Zoe, it validated in a lot of ways some of the things that we've been observing, I think you've been observing, But one of the critical things I said at every listen and learn, and Zoe and I we did divide and conquer. We had to. We covered a lot of ground. But one of the things I would really remind folks when I was standing in the room with them is that, one of the things that I love about Vermont that gives me a great deal of pride in the state that I now call home is there is a deep commitment to education in the state. And for folks who have lived in different states, you know it's not always like that. That was not always my experience as an educator in communities where they didn't really believe in education and its value. And I think that in this moment of crisis and hard decisions and big issues that we need to address, we really need to keep in mind that that is a strength. We can only do this kind of work because Vermonters genuinely in their core believe in education. And that's really the only reason to try to do this work. In other states, they would come to this crisis and they would just throw their hands up and say, we're not trying to fix it, right? But we can do this work together because of that deep-seated value, and we don't want to lose sight of that. So that was the biggest takeaway for me. It really reaffirmed for me something that I've long held as a belief, but really thought in action. So it was a wonderful experience.
Thank you, Jill. And I want to thank Jill for her partnership in this work. It really has taken the entire agency of education to pull this off. As a new leader to the state, I made a commitment to travel across the state, to hear from Vermonters, to really understand the educational priorities, the needs, and the aspirations of communities across Vermont. And as soon as I came to the state and started doing school visits, it was evident to me that this work had to be done in coordination with our entire team at the agency. And this became an expanded approach to really think intentionally around how we can develop the Agency of Education's strategic plan, and to do that in partnership with our entire staff. And it was really a rewarding experience to be able to do this work with our team. And we have been every month coming together as a staff to reflect on what we've learned. And you'll see through the presentation, we're really building ourselves as a more responsive and agile agency of education. And we've been proactive in addressing some of the feedback or requests for additional support all along the way, as we're also developing a longer term plan and strategic vision for the agency of education. So it's been really a wonderful experience for me. I share Jill's reflection that Vermonters really care about education. That is so clear. We've been able to talk with people all across the state who took time out of their busy days to really share with us what mattered most. And even though there are a lot of challenges, I sense a real deep commitment across the state to coming together and figuring out a way that we can make decisions that will best support our students. And we've heard a lot of a call for real collaboration, because it's evident that the issues that we're facing in education are quite complex. And they require a multifaceted solution. And we heard from all corners of the state, really a request to partner and to lead in this area in a way that is really building on the values of Vermont and really helping to think forward around how we can best support our students. So,
and so I also think, I think so you're able to thank you all for being here together.
Yeah.
We understand that having heard the governor's inaugural speech yesterday, you're like, give us the detail. Where's the proposal? And so we really do want to thank you for taking this time. So I feel very strongly that, we do have an education transformation proposal coming down the pipeline. You're going to have it soon. And it's really going to be very fleshed out, but it's really critical. You all are the people who are going to be making very big decisions about that proposal. And so we thought it was really important that you understood what was built into it. And so starting with the listen and learn, and so you'll speak to this, is what did we hear from the state? What did we hear from Vermont? You'll see it's reflected in the proposal. So just thank you for that. I know it's really last minute to grab you all on the first day, particularly just then.
And so to that point, it's a combination of factors that will be informing the proposal. We've heard from a lot of Vermonters, these themes are coming through pretty consistently across the state, and they're also validated by the data trends that we've been looking at. So we're really building upon what we're hearing in focus groups and what we're seeing and the data that are informing the recommendations and the priorities for the path forward. So I'll walk through a little bit about why the Listen and Learn Tour. I shared initially, it was, my commitment as a new leader to really understanding the state and making sure that in my role, we were prioritizing those initiatives and support efforts that were going to best meet the needs of the field. But it really grew from there because I realized that we needed to have this tighter coordination around strategic planning, and that there was a real opportunity for us to embed our work more deeply in the field. I'll share today what we learned, and we learned a lot, and we were able to talk to educators, talk to education leaders, talk to parents, talk to community members, and talk to the students. And so we'll surface all of those main themes, and then what's next as we move forward. So, why the Listen and Learn Tour? I've touched on this at a high level, but one of the things that we've signaled very strongly in our strategic process is that we're developing this plan using 3 guiding principles of promoting educational quality, equity, and sustainability. And to do this well, we knew we had to hear from Vermonters all across the state. We have articulated some very clear objectives of all of our listening sessions. Thank you for many of you who came out to our listening sessions. Appreciated your support being there and also being active partners in this work. As we shared at the Listen and Learn sessions, this was an opportunity for us to align the Agency of Education's work to the regional priorities and the needs of communities across Vermont. It was an opportunity for us to identify a shared vision for education, and that would help support the development of a strategic plan. Ultimately, as we bring people together and we learn about what's working well in our state, it's a way for us to be able to model those effective practices to improve access to high quality educational opportunities for all students. And we were very intentional about creating synergy with the Commission on the Future of Public Education and ensuring that what we were learning through the Listen and Learn Tour could also be shared with the Commission to inform their work as well. So we did develop a timeline that was very methodical and data driven. We organized this process into 3 phases. The first phase was to pull together data and give an initial data report that showed the current state of our system. During this time period in the summer, we also coordinated with superintendents to get input on how we could best develop this Listen and Learn Tour in a way that would really promote engagement and also to help us understand what are the big issues that your communities are facing so that we can tailor our engagement to address those needs. In phase 1, we released the State Education Profile Report in August. And then we took that report in phase 2 and really engaged in a very deep data validation process. One of the early commitments that I made was to ensure that we could improve data access and data reporting. We were hearing that immediately, that we needed to do that to inform decision making. And so during phase 2, we had regional planning sessions, and we had 6 different sessions with education leaders. Part of that work was looking at the data and identifying where we may need to make some improvements or expand the analysis or provide more context. And we had a very thorough process. And we identified that there have been some long-standing data issues, that there were some initial issues with how we were doing the calculations. And we were dedicated to correcting that and expanding our analysis. So that phase 2 was such an incredibly important part of not only learning, but building in improvements to our overall capacity as an agency to do data reporting. And we re-released the State Education Profile Report, and that has a lot of expanded analysis, and it's been thoroughly vetted with the field. And it was also an opportunity for us to implement some new validation processes as we do data reporting moving forward, and to provide additional training so that there's consistency in how we code things across the state to help with our overall reporting. So phase two, we involved, it was regional, it was superintendents, principals, business managers, curriculum directors, special education directors, school board members all came together. We'll talk a little bit about the components of that planning session, but really helped us to understand the priorities of the region. We started to develop regional profiles and also the role that the agency can play in best supporting our education leaders. From there, we moved into phase three, which was our public engagement session, and we hosted in-person and virtual sessions. We received a lot of participation. I will walk you through the different roles that people played that came to the meetings, but it was a really great cross-section of stakeholders in each community, and really had engaged two-way conversation that we learned a lot from. Through this process, we learned that we weren't having as much participation initially from our educators, our teachers specifically, and students. So we actually developed focus groups just for our educators. And we partnered with Up for Learning to have student focus groups. So we were able to capture their perspectives as well. So by the numbers, this is all, everywhere we went, the numbers, and then we'll show you where we went. So we hosted 6 regional planning sessions with education leaders. Something we heard was that type of forum is really helpful. Because it really was supportive of sharing best practices and learning. So that's something we're looking to build into our ongoing support in the field. We had 13 educator focus groups, 12 public engagement sessions, and 8 youth focus groups. Overall, we were able to engage with over 1,000 stakeholders. This is showing you the breakdown of different folks that participated. So 250 education leaders, 321 educators, 385 members of the public, and 115 middle and high school students were part of the Listen and Learn. We were really intentional about traveling all over the state. So it's a little bit hard to see in this visual, but you'll be able to see when we share the slide with you. Each of the stars represents where we went. The color coding represents that it was for the regional planning session, for the public engagement session, student focus groups, or a combination. So it's a little bit hard to see in the color coding, but as I look through, we went all the way from farthest into southern Vermont and Bennington and Brattleboro, all the way to Enosburg and Island Pond, Linden, yeah, and Linden near Island Pond. So really, did a full scope geographically traveling all across the state.
A lot of road miles.
A lot of road miles. It was a beautiful time in fall. It was beautiful to drive in the fall.
It got less fun when it was snowing.
That is also an accurate statement. So what are the key takeaways? And we're going to break these down, but we talked with a lot of different stakeholder groups, and we did see some consistency in these themes that we'll share. So one, it's really important for the state to strike that right balance between unity and freedom. We've heard that the motto of Vermont called upon often to describe this. And thinking about, what are the things that are most important for us to be consistent on to ensure equity in terms of educational opportunities for students and ultimately learning outcomes. So that's a process as we think about that. Within the agency's purview as our strategic plan, we're contemplating that about what do we need to be tight on and what do we need to be loose on. Those things that we're tight on are things that are most critical to supporting our districts and schools and educators and achieving our educational goals. And in those areas, we want to align our resources and support and really maximize our efforts. Second, we heard a lot about challenges in achieving equity. So there was a call for us to really think intentionally about ways in which we can make improvements to our system to ensure that equity. In practice, a lot of what was discussed was that certain districts, because of budget constraints, aren't able to offer the range of programs, courses, electives that others are. And so it does become an equity issue. And there's a call to focus on that. We asked Vermonters to reflect on the definition of student success. And it was clear that in Vermont, it's a holistic measure of student success is important. And we'll talk about what that means. We certainly heard a need to evaluate the fundamentals of academics and literacy and math, but also more of the well-rounded whole child education being important, and how do we effectively evaluate and support that. We have heard of an increasing need for our special education students. There's a growing need there. We'll talk about some of the challenges in terms of teacher shortage, and the additional support in some innovative ways that communities across the state are going to continue to need. And overall, and this has come up pretty clearly, and I think I've already mentioned it in my opening, the issues are really complex. It's not just one piece that we need to fix. It's really holistic approaches that look at, how we fund, how we deliver education, how we support our educators in the field. And so we heard repeatedly a call for really strong state leadership. But in a way, it's really collaborative. It's building upon the strengths of Vermont and what makes our community special. So I'm advancing, but I'm not affected.
That's all right.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah. And can I know something?
Absolutely.
I want to sort of call something out because it's something that in my time coming to the legislature, I've sort of heard it and I want folks to know that Zoe and I are quite transparent about this. The Agency of Education has not had a strategic plan since 2014. That is a reality. And so we really are being very intentional that this work is part of building a strategic plan. And we've been doing this work with agency staff. And Zoe's been really clear that the priorities that are coming out, that are being defined by the field, right? When you're building a strategic plan, you want your customer, which for us is our field partners and families and taxpayers and schools and students, to be driving what your priorities are. And so we're being very intentional that what we've learned is now what we're going to be prioritizing within the agency. So there's very clear and practical connections that are being made between the agency's work and this work that we've done in the field. And then a real commitment that as we develop our strategic plan, we're going to go back out and say, okay, this is what we've heard. This is what we're doing to prioritize that work. Validate that with us. Are we on the right path? So I wanted to call that out because I know that it's been a concern that's been shared in this building, and it's a concern that Zoe and I also share, is that the agency needs a lodestar and really a strategic plan. So we're doing that work out too.
One of the things we asked with our all staff meetings is that raise your hand if you were part of the development of the last strategic plan. And like maybe two hands went up, right? And we said, the point of this is in a couple months when we asked this, everyone's hand is up, right? Because everyone has felt part of this process. And we want the community to feel that too. And that's part of why this report is very lengthy. We really wanted to be able to reflect back what we heard so that as we're prioritizing, it really does resonate with what community members said were really important to them. And that's important to us as well. So the first phase, as we mentioned, was the regional planning sessions with education leaders. And we'll go to the next slide to share where we went. So one of our first questions as we did this work is, how do we organize? When we think about region, what does that mean? And so we relied on the Superintendents Association to define those boundaries. They have regional superintendents associations, and those are already ways in which our education leaders are coming together to plan and organize and share best practices. So we organized ourselves in that way. And so we hosted planning sessions in the 5 regions. We ended up splitting up one of the regions into 2 based on request and also because of availability and timing. And one of the first things we did when we brought people together was to ask questions to develop that regional profile. And so you'll see in our full report in the appendix, each of the sessions produced a narrative of that regional profile, and it reflected on the community assets for each region, the demographic changes, the industry changes, also the school identity, and some other factors that really bring together more of a qualitative understanding of community beyond the quantitative data. We went through at the beginning of these sessions a high-level data presentation. So everything we do as an agency is very data-driven. So we start with that, and then we broke out into smaller focus group conversations that were organized around key themes that we heard were important to focus on. So the first was a focus group on academic performance and accountability. We did share some of the work that we're doing as an agency to update our state plan, which is a federal requirement, and we're looking for feedback on how to prioritize that. Some of the things we've heard in the sessions was a need to have more reliable, transparent, easy to understand data. Timeliness was also called upon as an important feature of that work. Specifically, as you think about our state assessment reporting, it tends to be released in the winter timeframe. In most states, that's released in the summer. And so that's something we're actively working on to accelerate our timeframe so that those results are more relevant and can be used for continuous improvement for the academic school year. We also heard a need for greater alignment, really specifically across curriculum, proficiency-based learning, local assessments, and state assessments, and thinking intentionally around how we support that on a continuum. We heard a lot about the need for vision for holistic measures of student success. So yes, acknowledging that it's important to measure literacy, and we want to continue to do that, but also how do we think about other factors of student success like chronic absenteeism, social emotional learning indicators, attendance, things like that came in as possible metrics. We heard a request for the agency to provide greater direction and centralized support to improve state outcomes, but also making sure that we have that balance to allow for local customization and creativity. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been using this terminology of what have we tied on and what have we loose on, right? And that goes back to what we prioritize. But specifically, we've included a quote here from one of our sessions, which is saying, you know, when they're having to create everything from scratch, it becomes very laborious, expensive, it's time consuming. And so particularly on those things where we're requiring like new legislation or new implementation of a statewide initiative, for the agency to be taking a stronger role and being able to do some of that vetting and support, because it is creating a lot of extra work on our districts, which is taking away their time from being able to analyze their data and act on it and do the customization that's needed for their student population. We had another breakout session on college and career readiness. So what we heard very strongly across Vermont is a desire to expand access to flexible pathways and making sure that students get to explore their passions and think through how that can translate into a career for them. There was a very consistent theme about developing regional comprehensive high schools that combine traditional high school and career and technical education offerings, and then that being a much more streamlined way to do that. They're also requested a way to expand CTE and increasing access as we think about funding for CTE as well. And there was some reflection on barriers, including transportation can be a barrier. If there's different school calendars, that can be a barrier too. So there's some logistical pieces of that puzzle that we'll need to consider. And then the third session, Jill actually facilitated this session around mental health costs and system support because we were hearing a lot about the mental health needs. And there was a question about how the agency could actually quantify the cost and the expense to districts of providing mental health support. So we did provide, Jill facilitated these sessions to give you some feedback on what we've heard about that and then some broader trends.
So for this one, we really were trying to answer two questions because we know, particularly in this building last year, that student mental health needs, as well as the sort of rising costs of addressing those needs in schools was really a topic around which we didn't really have a lot of data. And so there was two pieces to this session. The first was more like qualitative. Describe, tell us what you are seeing. How are you experiencing, increases in student mental health needs in your schools? And so what we heard was that schools are seeing increased acuity. So the behaviors, both externalizing behaviors and internalizing behaviors, are more severe than in the past. And they're seeing younger students. So traditionally, you might see this more in your middle and high school, and now we're seeing elementary school students who tend to be externalizing. If anyone has a 9-year-old like me. So that was really important, to really get that sort of qualitative. We also heard about, critical staffing shortages, with mental health professionals, which has trickle-down impacts in that, we're seeing higher rates of burnout for sort of all teachers and staff. And we also saw, one of our folks in an early session described it really well. It was a misalignment of tiers of support from the very top that is trickling down. So we have higher acuity students who are in the building who maybe need support outside of the school setting, but those supports may not be available in community settings. But the school has an obligation to meet the needs of those students, and they're doing really valiant efforts to do so, right? So now you have a student who has high acuity needs. You have staff within the school that are trying to address those needs, but they're not actually the right level. And then you have misalignment all the way down. So you have students that are not able to get the services that they need, systems that are not aligned to address those, and it's really expensive. So that was a really great description, and I sort of asked that in every regional session, and people were nodding their heads like, yes, that is a description of what we're experiencing. The second piece of what we were trying to do is we brought a methodology to try to capture what might be mental health costs, looking at expenditure data and teacher and staff numbers. And so we brought this methodology. We wanted to sort of try to validate this with folks. And what we learned is that it's going to be way more complex than I think anybody in this room would like to hear. And what we've learned is within our sort of our accounting systems, the Uniform Chart of Accounts, there is no great, those are the codes. That's mental health, right? So there might be a code for school psychologists, right? But where we actually see a lot of the investment made in staff is the category that's called interventionists. The interventionists can be literacy interventionists, or they can be behavioral interventionists, right? And so going through this process, our conclusion was we're not going to be able to walk into this room and say to you all, we've quantified the cost of mental health in our school system. It's too complex. But what we've also taken, and this is work that I think was already recognized, both with our field partners and within the agency, is that there's actually real areas of improvement. We can get some traction on this by making improvement to some of our accounting and our data coding, and then ensuring that the field is actually coding with fidelity, because it will not surprise folks to know that it's like 1,000 flowers blooming in the sun right now when it comes to coding. So that was important. It was, sort of the failure was an important lesson, and that there's more work to be done there. But the result of that is that we do have to come in to say, we were not able to sort of quantify this. And I know that our field partners were also trying to do the same thing, and no one was kind of able to get their hands around that. But it was good to be able to identify who are all the different folks that are involved in this, what are all the different ways that we try to capture these costs, and that there is sort of an area for improvement here.
And I'd say overall, I would imagine throughout the session, you will have data requests for us. And so we'll be transparent with you around if there hasn't been consistent coding in certain areas. We just highlighted it for mental health. There may be some things we can use as a proxy, but we'll also have to be clear about what we have and what we don't have. And as we've had conversations with the field, we started to say, if this is really important for us to understand and quantify, we may need to do a different data collection. And we have had a lot of great success in partnership with the field in key areas and saying, yes, that's important. We're willing to spend an extra time in doing that. But just wanted to point that out overall, because I think that's going to be a broad trend.
Yeah, and for example, we're actually doing that work right now. We're about to deploy a class-size data collection, because we looked at about 3 different proxies, because we know that's of interest to you all, it's of interest to us. We don't collect that data. It's not something that we've ever collected. So we tried a bunch of different models, and then we finally said, no, we're actually going to have to ask everybody to provide this information. So that work is underway. And in some examples like that, we collect data, but it's not getting to the
it's not answering the question that we're asking, right? So it's too aggregated, and so we need a deeper dive. The next session, so still the regional planning, we had a separate session just for school board members. And the focus there was around data reporting and what could we do as an agency to best support you. We heard again that need for consistent, reliable data, specific to supporting budgeting decisions. As we walked through the data that we shared, board members expressed some concerns around the level of data suppression. So we'll share with you next week our state assessment results. And some of our schools are very small, and so we actually have to suppress their data. These schools have access to that data, but it does limit our ability to have any sort of comparative analysis. And that also limits ability to do some continuous improvement so that smaller schools know how another small school like them is doing, and they can plan together. So that was called out as a challenge. There's some challenges around outdated information. This is really around timing. We're working really diligently to change our timing so that we are reporting data earlier, specifically around state assessment data, but that shifts all of our data collection. And we're working very hard on that. In terms of inconsistent reporting across districts, I think this goes back to, and we haven't set as clear of kind of goals as a state and benchmarks of success. And so because of that, there's some inconsistency as you're looking, even within a supervisory union or one to another, how they're reporting out their performance and progress. So that was one just around overall data reporting, and that was related to school performance, enrollment trends, expenditure trends, all of that, really a comprehensive overview. And then the second piece was very much focused on budget that we heard from board members. They were asking for more state resources to help explain our budget system. It is very complex. And we did three things really in response to that. In the next phase of our planning, when we actually went out to the public, we did a training on our education funding system at a high level to provide an overview. We also produced the education funding report, which explains Vermont's system and compares it to other states. And so that's a resource for you as well. And the third area is we contracted with New Solutions K-12 to provide budget training in the field around strategic budgeting. We hosted sessions in December for that. I think that concludes. So that's what we learned from the regional education planning sessions. And so we took all of that information and we crafted our next phase, which is the public engagement. And we really thought about what's most important to bring to the public engagement sessions. We really pulled together the information from the regional planning, what was important to frame that conversation, and the educators were an important piece of that. So how we logistically structured this was wherever we had a public engagement session, we would have the focus group for students, for teachers before that, and it wasn't regional. So even though we were hosting it at one school, it was then for the broader area. So as we talk about the educator focus groups, you can before we provided the same kind of background knowledge in terms of sharing data, and then we broke out into smaller groups. We had conversations first around academic support. And so this is really asking the direct question to our educators in the field: how can the Agency of Education best support you? We also talked about a new initiative which we've launched called Read Vermont, which is designed to support the implementation of Act 139 and promote literacy outcomes statewide. And we're modeling some new strategies as an agency through that effort to really provide more job-embedded coaching and support. So we use that as a reference point to say, what about this is really helpful to you? What are areas that we need to refine and improve? We heard from our educators the need for consistent guidance from the AOE, specific to supports and standards. There was a concern among our educators around the impact of the budget cuts on teaching and learning in schools. We heard a very high value placed on quality professional development opportunities and really ways in which they can apply that learning immediately. So not so much virtual learning, but really more of that on the ground support. We've heard from our educators the need for high quality pre-K programs Their talk been very much noting a difference of students who are able to access pre-K versus students who are not, and the value of really being able to focus in on our young learners, making sure they're ready to enter school. We heard again, for additional supports for our special education students. They reflected on a number of teacher shortages being a challenge, and also long wait lists at therapeutic schools for the students that need really intensive support. And overall, we've heard another theme around college and career from our educators, and really ensuring that they could help their students to explore different pathways, so that they could find their success and interest beyond K-12 education. The second question we asked in our focus group was around the non-academic support. So what is needed? What are the conditions of success that need to be in place in your schools and in your classrooms to support student learning? And we heard a lot that schools are doing more than educating students. Our educators are also meeting the wraparound needs of their students that they're serving every day. And they talked a lot about having to meet their basic needs. Many are working to develop effective community partnerships. In some parts of our state, that's harder to do because it's harder to access those partners. And so that was I think these were really impassioned conversations because our educators are realizing that our students really need that additional support. They talked about the challenges of housing and affordability, and on some of the opioid epidemic and other challenges that their students are experiencing. So they talked about mental health. We mentioned that in the regional planning, that definitely came up as we were talking with our teachers. And then when we look at the impact of enrollment, most of the broad trend in Vermont is that we're seeing a decline in student enrollment. Where we are seeing an increase, there were kind of different needs that emerged in terms of being able to best manage increasing class size and support. So educator support and additional AOE support. We heard really, looking for the agency to be a very strong partner in education. There is such a noble profession, and our educators are going above and beyond. Really, the AOE taking the opportunity to showcase what's really working well in our schools and those success measures. We heard again that consistent guidance and support. When there's a lot of variability, it creates confusion. And so we're working very intentionally as an agency to do cross-functional work so we can streamline our communication and training and support to the field. We've heard a lot too about the need to involve families and parents more as partners and how we can best do that in a way that can be accessible to parents, because we also know many of our parents are working multiple jobs. They may not be available at the time that traditional times that schools can engage community members. So they asked for support in that area and more professional development opportunities. We heard a lot about challenges with teacher recruitment and retention. So something that we'll share with you next week when we look at the data trends is that we see a lot of disparity of differences in terms of teacher pay across our state, which does present some additional challenges with recruitment and retention within our districts. There's competition with across our state and with our neighboring states as well. Lindenville, did you remember that?
I did.
So that's what we heard from our educators. I really want to thank them for taking time out. They stayed after school to really engage with us in this conversation and share their ideas, and also the candor that everyone brought to these discussions.
Some of them even came to the public engagement session.
Did double duty, that's true.
Saw our data presentation again, I just couldn't.
Yeah, or maybe it wasn't clear enough the first time, I'm not sure. So moving in, then we went into our public engagement sessions. And I want to note, these were all hosted at schools or community organizations that invited us in. And so again, that's just another partnership that we really appreciate in the field of being able to bring people in and have these discussions.
And I just want to also note something. I think that you said it, but I want to reiterate it. This was not just Zoe and Bill. So at every one of these sessions, we had a pretty significant presence of AOE staff. who were there taking notes, who were Annie, I want to give Annie a shout out, was incredible support for the logistics of this entire endeavor. And so it really was, we actually had a large number of AOE staff that came and participated in this effort. And if they weren't actually there with a specific task, they were just coming because they wanted to hear and really be engaged in it. So I think that was really important, that this really was a broad team effort. And when we were doing our all staff meetings, those folks were reporting out as well, like this is what we heard. And so that was, I think, really impactful. And I want to acknowledge, as Zoe said, educators speak with a lot of candor. And I think that was also really good for our agency staff to be hearing directly from the folks that they work with every day. This is, this is how we experience your support or your oversight, and this is the way that maybe we can improve, but also here's something you all do well, and we would like to see more of that. And so having folks directly out in the field interacting with educators and principals, I think is invaluable, and we will continue to do so. We're really trying to set a new standard for how we engage.
And we, talked about as we go into communities and have these conversations, to go in with the continuous improvement mindset and with humility, right? It is really important to go in with openness and listening. And sometimes the feedback was hard to hear. And I really appreciate that our staff really listened and took to heart, what can we do to address? And in other areas, it was really great to hear the affirmation that what we're doing is working, right? So it's really so important to have done this with our entire staff. And I think what was some really great moments is when we were hearing feedback. We'd love if the AOE did this, or have you thought about that? And then one of our team members would say, yes, and I'd love to do that, and I'm excited. And so Jill and I are like, let's do that.
Let's do that. You are empowered.
Yeah. So those are exciting moments, right? Where you start to think people have had some ideas that they really want to be able to implement. And we're hearing that, yeah, this is the time that that's going to be needed and will be valuable. And so we had a lot of those aha moments as well, which was really exciting. And I think a rewarding part of this experience. So as we did our public engagement sessions, we asked people as they came in to kind of identify the roles. So you can see we had a really great cross section of educators, parents, students, and not as many students. We had separate focus group for students.
We need pizza though.
We needed
If you want
pizza.
students, you need pizza.
Yeah.
It's just law.
Some legislators, so thank you for those of you who came. Appreciate your involvement, and business owners as well. So again, we started this with our data presentation, explanation of our funding system. Everyone had the same background information as we went into these discussions. And then we broke out into focus groups and asked about, the first question was, how do you define student success? What does that look like in Vermont? What we heard is that when students are safe, they're happy, they're healthy. There was a lot of conversation around really creating the joy of learning, and that sure our students are curious, lifelong learners, that they're excited and engaged. And I know one member of the public said, I love it when my child comes home is excited to tell me about something that happened at school that day. And how do we make sure that that's happening every day to engage in those conversations? We definitely heard a need to master core fundamentals of academic success, but also those critical life skills and thinking forward around those future ready skills that our students will need to be successful. We heard a lot about making sure that our students have opportunities to really pursue success after post-secondary, that they're ready for that next step, and that we've given them those opportunities to explore their interests and connect that to their life after high school. And then those holistic measures, we've talked about that a lot. Vermont is really valued a holistic measure of student success. The next question, I would say though, it's very hard to find student success. It seems easy, and say, well, what does it look like? And at first there's a little bit of crickets, right? But that's a big question, and it's hard for us to get all of that right. So want to acknowledge that.
Students
So we'll get
are
to-
great at
yeah.
defining student
We'll get to
success,
the
which is
students.
Why we asked
Yeah.
them separately.
Students were pretty direct, and we'll talk about that.
Practical.
Yes. So the next set of questions are, okay, well, again, what are the opportunities and experiences, right? To really get concrete around this idea of equity. When we talk about the fact that we have limited funding, and we want to make sure that every child gets a well-rounded educational experience, how do we define that? So we heard a lot about this conversation of equity. We heard that their foundational needs need to be met, that they need to be supported for social emotional learning and mental health, their behavioral needs. We heard a lot about differentiation, making sure that we were equipped to meet the individual needs of our learners. We heard about really having engaged hands-on learning activities, expanded access to real world, career exploration and preparation programs. We heard a lot about need to do kind of cross-curricular types of educational delivery where you really spark the connection across how, literacy and social studies and science and doing these projects that really pull all these pieces together to make them meaningful and relevant. And there's some really wonderful examples of how some of our schools are doing that. And then overall, we've heard again, in some areas, we do need to have a more unified and state-driven approach in certain areas to make sure that there is that consistency and support to do the things that schools are asking for and parents desire in their childhood education.
And one thing I would say, and I think I don't think it's going to shock anyone in this room, but one piece of the listen and learn that I think was really valuable, and particularly the public engagement sessions, because there was a wide range of folks, with different experiences, and there was a lot of folks who hadn't had a kid in the system in a really long time, right? And I think you all probably are having these conversations when you're talking to your constituents, is that fundamentally, school has changed from when we were in the building. And that what we really heard, that list of, what should every student have, that's a really lengthy and complex list of things that we are asking schools to play a critical role in. Maybe not the only, entity or individuals that need to be involved, but that we really do ask schools to do more and different than, I think what a lot of us experienced. And I think that's important to sort of bring along the other adults that we're talking to, because there obviously is a disconnect of like, why is it, so expensive? Why this? And why are we asking for more behavior interventionists? Well, it's just a different landscape than it used to be. And so recognizing that fundamental change, I think, is important. And then the next step is there a way that we can do this better? And I think that's kind of what everyone is here to talk about.
And then the next focus group was talking about budget sustainability. We did the question kind of at the beginning, what topics do you want to cover? And one of the topics was budget, and either everyone's hand went up or no one's hand, because no one wanted to talk about the budget. So it kind of was a mixed bag as we went across the state. But we started by first talking about how do we measure student success? What supports are needed? And now let's talk about the budget, because ultimately a budget is going to be how we prioritize what we focus on in terms of our education. So what we heard was that, definitely communities are facing very challenging budget situations right now, based on declining enrollment, rising costs in different areas. We did hear a need for increased resource sharing and conversations around regionalization for some services to better maximize the support and the expertise that we have in communities. We also, I think it's interesting to have this conversation in light of some of the educator workforce shortages that we have, right? In some cases, it's hard to hire for critical roles, so that necessitates some of these broader regional sharing efforts. We also definitely heard a request for even more systemic considerations, that some of these challenges may be beyond the control of the local community, and needing to have more systems integration as we think about coordinating services and support. We've had coordination already with our sister agencies in this work, and also participation from our fellow agencies in the Listen and Learn to really be thought partners in this work around how we can better do that alignment and integration. But we definitely heard, as you can see, I think in this quote, that in many instances they're calling for more regional decision-making, because our system is so hyper-local, that it's creating a lot of challenges, to be able to deliver educational quality consistently. And it's also creating a lot of really hard budget challenges.
And I would say this part of the conversation, I think this was hard for folks. Like they want to talk about the budget, but one of the things that really was clear to me in these conversations is the complexity of the system and its highly, highly local nature makes it really hard to sort of answer the question when we say, what would you do? How would you balance? Part of our question was like, we're seeing, a long-term trend of decreases in student enrollment. And, that mirrors the state demographics, right? How do you balance that with the two slides prior, the desire for more, the desire for better quality, the desire for more opportunity. And it sort of stumps folks a little bit, and it should, right? If we could have cracked this nut, we would have cracked this nut already. And so what it was really validating in some ways to me is that the complexity and high localization makes it really hard for folks who are clearly engaged. They're spending their time in the evening to spend this time with us and talk this through, but to try to come up with solutions without sacrificing those things that they just said were really key priorities for them, it sort of stumps them. It was a really good conversation, but it was like, oh, there wasn't one beautiful solution that sort of rose to the surface, right? Because it's really complex and all the levers have to do.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there's definitely a request to do more, wanting more, but the decision at hand was cutting and doing less, right? That's the reality. So as we mentioned, we were hoping students would show up to the public engagement sessions, but I think they had other things to do after school that were maybe, and we didn't have pizza, so that was the critical flaw. So we decided, we actually partnered with our, the Principals Association to help us to think about this. How do we organize it so that we can engage with our students? And we really had great partners with our principals in opening up their schools during the day where we could really engage students in a meaningful way. And we asked students to reflect on their current experience if they're in middle and high school, and also to think back on when they were in elementary school, to give us that whole perspective of their journey through the Vermont education experience. So what we've heard come out clearly from the students is strengths through their teachers and staff, that they also felt like their teachers and staff were working really intentionally to build a strong sense of community, that they felt included, that they felt that they belonged. That sense of belonging was really important. Challenges that we've heard was sometimes there were behavior issues and unclear rules and consistency with how to manage behavior. So that is an area where as an agency we're thinking about how we can provide more training and support in this critical area. And related to this was a need for more effective restorative responses to harm and conflict. We heard clearly that students want expanded learning opportunities. They want to be able to participate in internships, more real world experiences beyond the classroom, really thinking about how we're making learning applicable for our students, and creating that exposure to career possibilities. They talked about wanting to have more advanced coursework. They actually asked for more rigor in many areas, because they want to be challenged. We heard students articulating that. I want to have opportunities where I'm challenged, and stretching and learning more. And doing that in a way that's project-based and also personalized and custom to what their interests are. And then of course you can see in this quote, they also want to have fun at school, right? This is also just a big part of their overall development. And that culture and climate at school is important. And, an aspect of that is that there's a really well-rounded curriculum, and there's electives and there's specials and clubs and things like that they can participate, and that came in through their discussion as well. So we asked them to also think about the resources that are needed in schools to support their success. So they reflected on the need for high quality and skilled teachers, of course, and really emphasize that ability to build strong relationships with students. Again, that access to wide ranging learning opportunities, that challenging component they were looking for to really stretch and learn, to support their interests, real world connections. We've heard that a lot through this presentation. They also reflected on kind of a balanced need between both academic and mental health supports. So that was reflected also within the students of the mental health and wraparound needs. They talked about the overall conditions of the school and having a well-maintained school that's accessible, inclusive, safe, and that strong sense of community and being a kid and having fun. This quote is talking about some really specific, very concrete. What do you want? I want to be able to support. Says I want to be able to support yourself, have financial independence, and a job that you enjoy. Right? Really concrete from the students, because they want to work, not just work to survive, but work to really be able to leverage their talents and experience that joy. So what's next? I've highlighted throughout this presentation what we've done in response to some of the input that we've received. We have made very significant data infrastructure improvements and also built in some new data validation processes that is really been done collaboratively with the field. And I want to emphasize that because we very much appreciate our superintendents, principals, business managers, head of schools being involved in that work to do that data validation. We also launched Read Vermont, which is a new comprehensive statewide effort to promote literacy outcomes. We have designed this to really support all learners along the continuum from kindergarten, early education, all the way to 12th grade and adult education as well. We are providing job embedded coaching in the field. We're also providing broader learning support for learning communities across the state. And we'll soon be offering some additional tools and resources to families and caregivers to help reinforce. Part of this effort is also partnering with our higher education institutions and thinking about that coordinated support and teacher preparation as well. But we've done a lot with budget training and resources. So I've already highlighted some of the initiatives that we've launched, and we're continuing to make being a partner in this area. And then the state assessment reporting and training. We recognize that the timeline makes it challenging for that data to be relevant and helpful to inform continuous improvement planning. So we're really making strides to accelerate that. And also we'll be offering some additional training so that there's greater clarity around how we are assessing student competencies based on the Vermont CAP, and really understanding what types of questions that are being asked. And that training will be launching very soon. Know where we're going. So we're taking all of this input. It's helping to inform our strategic plan to be really focused on those things that matter most and are going to make the biggest impact on our state. We have already a lineup of some additional data reports that we will be producing. We've been calling them topical reports because there's some deeper dives that we need to do in certain aspects of our system. So the reports that you can expect in the short term will be an overview of our special education system. We know there's been a lot of questions. We've highlighted here that there's some increasing needs. So we will be producing that report along with around college and career readiness as well, or two that are next in the hopper that we're working on to release. And all of the timelines for our pre-K.
Yes,
Pre-K. Pre-K actually is coming first. So you're gonna get pre-K first. I guess I always thought that was done. There's still some editing. Okay, so pre-K first, special ed and college and career. And what we've done in all of this is really try to prioritize based on what we're hearing in the field, where the biggest questions are and what we need to share in order to inform decision-making. We expect through our collaboration with you, you're gonna highlight some additional analysis that will be important. And we'll also be prioritizing that as we collaborate.
And I think one thing I would also highlight is that we're really moving to a new norm within the agency, that when we release one of these reports, we're also releasing the source data with it. So when we re-release the state profile report, if you go on our website, the Listen and Learn page, and you see the re-released state profile, right underneath it is an open source data file. It's all in there. It's been validated and vetted by the field, and really can become a source of information for your own analysis. And we're also trying to release with those reports what we're calling recipe cards. So when we give you a chart or graph, you're going to understand what went into the recipe that produced that, so that you can also then do your own analysis. And that's really a standard that Zoe has 100% gets credit for. We're really working to, change that norm and culture within the agency and then also with our partners in the field. And what we have discovered through this process that didn't know is that we collect 300 different data collections every year. And now we are really committed
That go to the federal government,
Yeah.
but are not necessarily used to inform continuous improvement in our state,
We're
right?
going to use them.
And so we're using them and we're mapping different data sets that haven't been combined before, right? To really begin to tell the full picture and understand the complexity of our system and to really target and drive improvement efforts. And we've been really clear about using data, I keep saying this term, but using data to drive continuous improvement, that being really critical to this process, about using data to support, to really help us all in improving ultimately opportunities for students. And with the data transparency, we know that that's a critical piece because we need to make sure that there is full transparency. Everyone understands the source data, they can recreate it. So that there is more credibility around that to inform decision-making. I think that will be important also in your work and we're committed to doing that.
And I think we want to sort of acknowledge that we're at the very beginning of that work and that we're really dealing with a lot of sort of technical debt in this area. And it's really revealing, I would say, fragility across the entire system. Not just in literally the IT infrastructure that generates this, but also the processes. And so it's the start of what I think will be really important transformation in what you all can expect and the public can expect in terms of, what does the agency produce in terms of data that's usable and clear and accurate. But there's a lot to do in this space. And so I think we've got a really good start. And then we've got to do it and do it again and then do it again. And it's cultural change as well as like infrastructure.
And then how is this
There we
all
go.
connected,
Yeah.
right, as we get into policy work? That's a key piece. So we have been sharing over the last few months what we've learned with Governor Scott. And that certainly is important in informing the thinking. So as he shared yesterday, he put forward a framework for a policy proposal. And some of what we've heard through the listen and learn is that there's so much complexity to our funding system that it's creating a lot of stress and anxiety. And there's a lot about it that's not serving us as intended. And so that's the rationale for moving towards a foundation formula to have more predictability and also to have more equity in our system. Also, we talked about some issues of scale as we went through the presentation and being able to deliver on those expectations. So that's a key component of this. And we've heard consistently across the state being clear on if we're going to expect this as a state, how can our agency help to provide clearer guidance and support and guardrails for that? So not just with budgeting, but overall, as we think about achieving our goals of promoting educational quality and success. And then, of course, we've heard consistently the challenges as you all have around property tax relief. So those are all how all of this fits in. And so with any budget decision, it's about how do we prioritize limited funds to deliver on our goals and hopes and aspirations for our students. So I think a lot of these qualitative themes are important for us to take into account as we move forward in that type of.
And we don't want to lose sight of the student as things get complicated and heated and that's for Zoe and I, that is our focus and what we see as our role in this larger conversation is how do we keep the student right there at the center of the conversation as you all are doing really complicated work.
And then these are some resources for you. So at the agency's website, we have a page for the Listen and Learn tour. And within that, you'll see a number of our reports. The full summary report you can find there with all of the appendices. I'm sure you have not had time yet to read it. It's but 114 pages.
It's bedtime reading.
And so we did do a quick video too, just the more digestible. If that could be helpful to share with your constituents around kind of the high level things that we heard.
True story. Before we published it, I was reading the Listen and Learn summary report before bed, and it was my son's bedtime story for that night, and he turned to me and he said, "Mama, can I please just go to sleep?"
It worked.
So it's not just the entire agencies involved in this, our entire families are also involved in this.
It's scintillating.
So I do appreciate, you allowing us to come in and share what we've learned across the state. It's really been helpful, to us and it really informed our thinking, and guiding our next steps. So I'd like to open up if you have any questions for us.
Thank you both very much. Appreciate the time you put into this and into the presentation. I might just ask a first question. Especially from what you heard from educators and especially with the sort of, learn, listen, and then lead, and then transformation, how do we get there? To me, a lot of that speaks to capacity at the AOE. I think that there's a lot, I think educators are asking for it. They're asking for the AOE to take the lead in helping them become better educators. I think that goes without saying. It's a role the AOE used to play more significantly before it was downsized back in the earlier 2000s. So can you talk a little bit how this translates into what the AOE over the next couple of years might look like?
So we've said from the beginning of the Listen and Learn tour is that this should and will inform the development of our strategic plan and how we align ourselves as an organization to best meet the needs of the field. So our immediate next steps, we've been sharing all of this with our staff. In certain areas, we've made different decisions around what to prioritize in terms of key initiatives and support. So some of that is reprioritizing efforts. And we've been doing that along the way. And now we're moving into division planning, where we're really sitting down with each division. We're bringing back, here are the most important things for us to be able to support. What is the role of your division in doing that? What is the capacity? How does that align with existing work? And so we're in the process of doing that. But ultimately, there are questions around when we think about the overall governance and scale of our state around ensuring that there's lining up in terms of the agency resources and ability and capacity to meet the needs of the field. We have ramped up capacity in certain areas in anticipation of the needs. So we did ramp up capacity as it related to budget and data analytics support. And we did that pretty early on in the summer. And we're about to ramp up some support around academics because we've heard that there's been a strong call for greater support from the agency in that area. But we want to be thoughtful as we go down that path and making sure that we're really being responsible in terms of how we're aligning our work, maximizing efficiency, and then having those conversations around where there may be additional needs or ways we need to deliver our work differently to support that.
And Peter, one thing that Zoe has spoken about really eloquently is we have a little bit of a strange thing happening in Vermont where the expertise resides is not really optimal. And so one of the things that we really are trying to do with the strategic planning and the listening and learning and all of the sort of subsequent education transformation is to make sure that we have expertise at the right level. And so it is a great example of a statewide special education director responsible for 80,000 students is now responsible for less than 1,000 students, but is making $20,000 more a year. So there's misalignment. When we talk about scale, we're not just talking about schools, we're talking about the scale all the way up and down the system. But very much to Zoe's point, we need to be thoughtful about what we're prioritizing, where we're prioritizing it, and making sure that we have the right people at the right level doing the right work. I think is a really critical piece as well.
I think the comparisons to have the conversation around the budget, it's not about just investing more, right? It's not just about more staff, right? It's about thinking about how we align our work. And really the other piece of the puzzle when you think about having the right expertise at the right level is when you think about that in the context of our educator workforce shortage. It's really challenging to hire for some of these specialized roles. And so we do need to be thoughtful as a state about where those positions are best served at a very local level at a regional level, at a state level. I think these are all conversations that are going to be really important as we think about how to support the overall system. But we're going to be very, as we have been so far, very methodical in walking through that and data driven and priority oriented to making those recommendations.
Thank you very much. Senator Butler.
No, thank you for coming. I think everybody around this table is spending a lot of time with the two of you.
Yeah.
2 weeks. Look forward to that. And thank you for letting us do this, make this a joint hearing. In fact, we'll be talking about that because
Absolutely.
perhaps more often. We in the Senate Education Committee, we're gonna meet Secretary, Deputy Secretary, jointly with Finance Committee a few times next week. We can look for ways for us to come back together. So I guess to do that, any questions from any members of the Senate? You don't need to have a question, but you should do. Raise your hand.
I do, but it's gonna.
Well, yes, it's well, 25. So,
Exactly.
Quick piece of this.
Oh, man. Right after lunch.
Yeah.
Come on. So I feel like we weren't quite set up for success here.
Yeah, whole table, anybody for follow-up questions? It's a big report, a lot was gathered. So, yeah, Senator Chase.
If I could, so first I appreciate the update report. You did mention though in your briefing that, we're at the very beginning. And, the reality is, which we learned 2 years ago as freshmen, train's already moving 100 miles an hour. We're all jumping on board trying to figure out where it's going. Do we know enough now to start pulling levers? Okay, see nodding heads. And
Yes.
That's, I'm just looking for that acknowledgement that you feel comfortable that we're not moving too fast. We're gonna start moving far. I'm not sure, I just wanna make sure you're comfortable with, where we are now, that we know enough to start pulling them.
I think you'll start to have confidence around that as we meet with you every day. For the past 6 months, we've made a lot of progress and you're gonna see that. I mean, just this report, being able to travel around the state, get this input and be able to reflect it back around the priorities, I think is a significant milestone. You're gonna also hear from us over the next 2 weeks. We've made some really critical measurable progress as we've done research in other states of best practices and our own analysis and how some of these strategies and policies can work in the Vermont context. So yes, we feel very prepared to come forward with some concrete recommendations that are based on data, based on understanding Vermont, and based on research. When we say we're at the beginning, we understand that this work is a multi-year effort, and we'll be mindful of that as we can lay out those recommendations.
And Zoe has a great phrase, so I'm just gonna post it. I'm quoting you a lot.
You are, yeah.
That's the Zoe Saunders. We needed to move slow to move fast. We're ready to move fast.
And we need to move fast. We understand that. There's an incredible sense of urgency.
And we're going to be partners in that speed.
Yeah.
As well. We really
Yeah,
have to do
it's
it
really
together.
exciting.
And I think part of the challenges of this work is very complex, and I think we will need support and partnership around keeping our arms around the whole. So it's kind of easy to piecemeal components of this and let's talk about mental health, or let's talk about the funding, or let's talk about governance or equality. It all needs to be considered together. And I think that's something too that the Commission on the Future of Public Education also articulated, is that we really need to look at this as a multifaceted approach and make sure that there's tight coordination.
And, for our two committees, so the Secretary proposed kind of a schedule of briefings. Some of them are finance-based, some of them are policy-based. We created a schedule in here as well for the policy type things. We'll definitely want to include you, and if the space works for all of you, we'll probably stick with it. So we'll all be traveling this road together as much as possible.
In anticipation of our next session with you, do you have any specific questions or areas of inquiry that you want to make sure that we can address as we we'll be working together really
Yeah,
closely.
we'll be
the
here a
next-
lot, and so we're happy to kind of.
But
take
we want to
that question
customize
and-
things to make sure that it is also valuable to you.
Service.
Thank you. So you talk a lot about data. You started off the whole presentation about data. What we're really interested in is not pure data, but synthesize, summarize, conclusions, et cetera. That's what you know,
Yes.
if you want something you could provide us, help us come up to speed with you, it's those summarized reports. That would be very helpful.
Okay, excellent, that's helpful to know. In that vein, I would say from today's session, what we heard that we need to really think about and prioritize is being able to expand college and career opportunities, ensure students have a core set of electives and enrichment opportunities. I think we also talked a lot about early childhood education being really important. So those are some things that I think are very critical from what we learned, and also the fact that there's a lot of mental health needs. And so how do we support those? So all of that is factoring into, as we move forward, how we make recommendations based on the needs that we've heard.
So Williams.
So I apologize for being late. I wasn't sure where we were. But I see three components. We're here. We need to be here. And we set policy for education. And what we've been told the first 2 weeks of the session, work about getting the education tax rate down. So do you see within how many weeks away are you from having a timeline in your strategic plan with goals and objectives for people to be?
Yeah.
Because that's going to be important, I think.
So I think there's kind of two parallel things that are happening now. We're continuing to develop our strategic plan, and there's some key policy recommendations that will come forward that will also inform how the agency needs to be able to align itself to support. And so in that testimony schedule, you can see that we're tracking towards the governor's budget address to have a lot more detail around this policy framework. And being intentional about every time we're talking about a specific topic area, that we can start to make connections to what are those important policy considerations.
And
Because
so
the work is big.
Yeah, intentionally, with each of those sessions, we're pointing to an aspect that's in the proposal that will be at the budget address.
Right.
And I think there may be some concerns about like what level of detail is going to be ready in this, and we're saying it's the full proposal with the modeling and the analysis, and then highlighting for you all, these are key areas of policy consideration and discussion, right? So what we're going to be putting forth is comprehensive, it's modeled, it's research and evidence-based, but there is also still pieces that need really to be discussed and real consideration to be given. So it's not every single aspect of it, but it's really good framework.
And we started with this because every piece kind of goes back to this, right? Because what's so important as we're talking about education policy is how it fits into the Vermont context.
Yeah.
We're not in a situation where we can just say, okay, whatever this state does, we're going to plop into Vermont. That's not going to work. And so this is a really important foundation to understand how we can take a best practice that has been really effective in another state and think about how we could modify that to work here in Vermont. So the listen and learn is really helping to provide us that framework. We're going to keep coming back to that, saying, well, here's what we learned. Here were the challenges. Here are the other things we need to prioritize in our state. So this is a foundation to that work, because I know that it's challenging when you kind of get a cookie cutter statute from another state. It's like, this won't work in Vermont. This work is going to help us to do that customization.
Great. If nothing else, it being Friday and all that, I won't hesitate.
Is it
to say-
Friday?
I won't hesitate to say we can wrap up here and now then.
Okay. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.